The certified letter demanding $250,000 landed in my mailbox the very same day I lowered my father into the ground. That was the moment the HOA board made the biggest mistake of their entitled, power-drunk lives. Picture this: I'm standing in my driveway at 3 p.m., funeral suit still clinging to me like a second skin, red cemetery dirt crusted on my polished shoes. My hands shake as I tear open the envelope, the metallic tang of fury rising in my mouth. According to this notice, I supposedly owed nearly $250,000 in fines for property violations, on land my grandfather bought in 1952, back when this entire subdivision wasn't even a developer's fantasy. A garbage truck rumbled past, diesel fumes filling the air, but even that couldn't mask the suffocating sweetness of Karen Whitmore's floral perfume. She strutted across the street in her designer funeral dress, lips curled in fake sympathy that dripped like poison. "Timing's unfortunate, Marcus, but business is business," she purred, pressing more paperwork into my hands, the kind of papers that could erase 3 generations of sweat, blood, and calloused hands. But here's what Karen didn't know: I wasn't just fighting for a workshop. I was about to uncover something that would flip this entire battle on its head. I legally owned half of her precious neighborhood. So let me ask you, what would you do if an HOA Karen tried to steal your family land on the very day you buried your father? Drop your wildest revenge fantasy in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from, and if your neighborhood has any HOA horror stories of its own. But before I tell you how Karen's empire came crashing down, you need to understand my family's story. Because once you do, you'll realize just how spectacularly she was destined to lose. My name is Marcus Castellano, 42 years old. I'm a third-generation contractor, carrying the same stubborn principles and rough hands that built my family's legacy. Our property, a 3-acre spread my grandfather Antonio purchased in 1952 for $800 cash, is the heart of that legacy. Back then, the land stretched across cornfields and cow pastures as far as the eye could see. The house itself is nothing flashy, just a modest 1,200 square foot ranch that's showing its age. But the real treasure is the workshop. A cavern of humming welders, groaning steel beams, and the crunch of gravel under steel-toed boots. It's where my grandfather taught my father taught me, and now where I'm teaching my daughter Emma. She's 16, visits every other weekend, and when she picks up her great-grandfather's tools, I see a living chain, 3 generations strong. That land isn't just dirt and wood. It's history, heritage, and the only thing that's kept me grounded through a messy divorce and everything else life's thrown at me. Enter the villain of this story, Karen Whitmore. Karen is 38, a former pharmaceutical sales rep who reinvented herself as a community leader when she moved into the freshly minted Willowbrook Estates 8 years ago. She's the type who weaponizes her smile, standing 5 feet 6 inches in expensive heels with that aggressively bleached hair that screams, "I demand to speak to the manager," from 3 blocks away. Her perfume doesn't just linger, it invades. And her oversized colonial, complete with manicured hedges and a gaudy Italian fountain that probably cost more than my truck, is the perfect symbol of her artificial empire. Through charm, manipulation, and proxy votes from absentee homeowners, Karen crowned herself HOA president. And let me tell you, she rules with the kind of passive aggression that could cut steel. She's the type who stabs you in the back and then gasps in horror when you dare to bleed on her designer carpet. Now, here's the thing: my family's land predates all of Willowbrook Estates. Until 2003, nothing but farmland surrounded us. That's when Hartwell Properties swooped in, buying up 200 acres and building a 47-home subdivision literally wrapped around our property like a noose. The developer even offered my grandfather $400,000 to sell out back then. Serious money. But Antonio Castellano, stubborn as granite, refused. He passed in 1994, and the land transferred to my father, who carried that stubborn pride until the day he died. The new neighbors hated our workshop. To them, it was an eyesore, a stain on their pristine suburban fantasy. They ignored the fact that my business was fully legal, within every city ordinance, and had been standing long before their overpriced homes existed. But to people like Karen, facts never matter, appearances do. At first, her campaign against me was petty, noise complaints when I started work at 7 a.m., even though city law allowed 6 o'clock. Demands to move equipment out of sight to preserve property values. Thinly veiled accusations that my clients brought undesirable elements into the neighborhood. But Karen wasn't satisfied with petty harassment. She escalated. City inspectors came by 6 times in 3 months, each time finding nothing wrong. That's when Karen delivered her masterstroke, the $250,000 fine, citing unauthorized structures and environmental violations. She timed it for the exact morning I buried my father. A calculated act of cruelty. Her opening salvo arrived in a thick manila envelope, pages of legal threats claiming that my workshop violated HOA covenants that didn't even exist when my grandfather broke ground. She demanded immediate demolition of my family's workshop, threatening $500 daily fines and attorney fees if I didn't comply within 30 days. What Karen didn't count on was my father's meticulous filing habits. While her printer spat out intimidation tactics, I dug into old files and found the original 1952 deed, complete with county clerk's seal and my grandfather's signature. And here's the kicker: HOA covenants only apply to properties that signed the agreement. My grandfather never signed anything because the HOA didn't even exist until 2003. Our deed predated Karen's entire kingdom by over 50 years. And in that moment, standing in my father's office, the faint scent of his Old Spice still hanging in the air, I swear I could feel his hand on my shoulder, telling me to fight. But Karen wasn't done. She organized a community safety meeting, rallying 30 residents with a PowerPoint presentation titled Protecting Our Community Values. She started a Facebook group, Willowbrook Concerned Citizens, posting pictures of my equipment with captions like Industrial Hazard in Residential Zone and Property Values at Risk. She built her army carefully: Dr. Lucas the cardiologist worried about air quality, Susan the teacher scared for child safety, and Tom the banker warning about mortgage impacts. The language was coded, but I knew exactly what it meant. My response? Simple. Show up. At the next HOA meeting, I walked into their clubhouse with my surveyor friend Jake and a stack of legal documents. I spread the original deed across the table and calmly explained reality: our property was never part of their HOA. Period. Karen brushed it aside, claiming my grandfather had illegally exempted himself. The board, clearly under her thumb, voted 4-1 to continue enforcement. That's when I looked Karen dead in the eye and said, "You might want to double-check your legal position before this gets expensive for everyone." From that point forward, I shifted from defense to offense. I documented every false claim, every baseless complaint, every ounce of harassment. My father's workshop, its worn concrete floors and scarred wooden beams, was about to become ground zero for Karen's downfall. And when she hired a high-dollar law firm to escalate the pressure, claiming the HOA had eminent domain powers to for-sale my land, that's when I knew her greed had blinded her completely. She wasn't just trying to silence me. She was trying to steal my land outright. But while Karen thought she was playing chess, she didn't realize she was up against someone who'd been preparing for this fight his whole life. Because buried in the county archives, under buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of old paper, I uncovered a fatal flaw in her empire. The original subdivision plat maps showed that in 2003, when Hartwell developed Willowbrook Estates, their surveyor made a colossal mistake. They had included 0.3 acres of my family's land inside their development. Land they never owned. Land they had no right to sell. And worse? Several of Karen's beloved Willowbrook homes, including hers, were built partially on my property. And that's where the story really begins. The foundation at 1247 Maple Lane crossed 8 feet into my boundary line. The garage at 1251 Maple stretched a full 12 feet onto my property. But the crown jewel? The HOA's entire community playground sat squarely on land my grandfather had paid taxes on for half a century. And that wasn't even the best part. Night after night, under buzzing fluorescent lights at the county archives, I dug deeper. Buried in a dusty filing cabinet labeled Water Rights 1950 to 1960 was a forgotten gem, a 1953 agreement granting my grandfather exclusive water rights to the natural spring that fed the entire area. Every drop that filled Karen's retention pond. Every gallon keeping those manicured lawns green through summer droughts. Even the water trickling through that ridiculous Italian fountain in Karen's front yard, it all came from my spring. For 8 years, Karen had been trespassing on my water rights without even knowing it. The irony was delicious. While she tried to bleed me dry with legal fees, she'd been stealing my water to prop up her suburban paradise. Rebecca had warned me not to play my hand too early. So, I stayed quiet. I hired a professional survey team to remap the entire property with modern GPS equipment. The results confirmed everything: 12 houses were sitting partially on my land. The so-called HOA common area was actually private property belonging to me. And Karen's pride and joy, a backyard gazebo where she hosted her wine-soaked HOA meetings, extended 8 feet into my boundary. The beauty of revenge is patience. While Karen strutted around, believing she had me cornered over some ancient permit violation, I was sitting on a nuclear bomb that could force half her neighbors to literally move their homes. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet. No, the best revenge is letting your enemy dig their own grave, one frantic shovel of arrogance at a time. Then came Karen's next escalation, her attempt to bring in the federal cavalry. She filed complaints with every agency that had an acronym: Health Department, Fire Department, Zoning Enforcement, even the EPA. She painted me as some outlaw running an illegal industrial operation in the middle of her perfect cul-de-sac. What followed was a parade of inspectors that would have made a reality show producer salivate. The fire marshal found every extinguisher and sprinkler system up to code. The health inspector found zero contamination, zero improper disposal, nothing. Zoning confirmed I was in full compliance. And the EPA guy? He actually complimented me on my environmental record. Karen's reaction to all these clean bills of health? Pure Karen meltdown. She accused the inspectors of corruption, demanded second inspections at the state level. And when she ranted at city council, it was like watching the final boss battle of Karen culture, every classic move on display, delivered with escalating desperation. Meanwhile, Rebecca sat me down and explained a legal concept that made my blood run cold: adverse possession. If someone occupies your land openly for 20 years without challenge, they can claim it legally as their own. The clock had started ticking in 2003 when Hartwell built the subdivision. That meant I had less than 3 years to reclaim every inch of stolen ground, or risk losing it forever. The weight of those law books in Rebecca's office felt heavier than steel beams as she showed me case after case where property owners lost everything because they didn't act. I realized I wasn't just fighting an HOA anymore. I was racing against the clock. But Karen, blinded by her own arrogance, decided to launch a media campaign. She invited Channel 8 News to cover the dangerous commercial operator threatening suburban safety. On camera, she played the role of brave community protector, all smiles and soundbites, casting me as the reckless villain endangering families. What she didn't expect was that I'd be ready. When reporter Jessica Mills arrived with her camera crew, I didn't yell. I didn't snap. I didn't play into the caricature Karen hoped for. Instead, I calmly laid out my evidence: my grandfather's deed, my permits, the harassment timeline, Rebecca's legal briefs. Jessica wasn't just a headline chaser. She was a real journalist. And when the segment aired, the narrative flipped. It wasn't "contractor threatens community safety." It was HOA overreach, when property rights collide with suburban expectations. Karen's fury was volcanic. She called the station, demanded retractions, accused them of conspiracy. But while she was screaming into phone lines, I was quietly pulling HOA financial records through public information requests. And that's when the real bombshell hit. Karen had spent $47,000 of HOA funds, money taken from her neighbors' pockets, on legal fees for her vendetta against me. Most residents had no idea why their quarterly fees had doubled, or why road maintenance and landscaping budgets had mysteriously dried up. Now, I had the receipts, literally. Her empire began to crack. Neighbors who once backed her started asking questions. Why was their money being funneled into Karen's personal war? Why were assessments rising while services declined? But then came the knockout twist: in the HOA's own bylaws, hidden in plain sight, was a residency requirement. The president had to live in the community for at least 10 years before taking office. Karen had only been in Willowbrook for 8. That meant every vote she cast, every assessment she levied, every legal action she initiated, was invalid. Karen's entire presidency was built on a lie. And just when I thought it couldn't get any better, the title search arrived. I'd paid $847 to Stewart Title Company, waited 3 weeks, and now held a thick envelope that could decide my future. Inside was a discovery so devastating it made Rebecca nearly drop her coffee when I showed her. Hartwell Properties, the developer of Willowbrook, had never properly obtained road easements. Which meant every homeowner in the subdivision accessed their property by driving across my family's land. Think about that. The tree-lined streets? Mine. The stone entrance with the Willowbrook Estate sign? Mine. The clubhouse, the pool, the playground? All sitting on land I legally controlled. Rebecca stared at the survey maps and whispered, "Marcus, you don't just have a case here. You have the power to shut down an entire neighborhood." The implications were catastrophic. Insurance companies would pull coverage without corrected surveys. Mortgage lenders would demand new assessments. Property values weren't just at risk, they were already collapsing. Karen panicked. She called an emergency HOA meeting, suddenly soft-spoken, pleading for compromise. She offered me $75,000 for easement rights to land worth 10 times that amount. "It's just an innocent mistake by the developer," she begged. "We can work this out like neighbors." But the spring water rights bombshell still loomed. My grandfather's 1953 agreement gave me exclusive control over 50,000 gallons a day. Willowbrook consumed 35,000 daily, most of it on irrigation and that decorative pond. If I wanted, I could shut them off tomorrow. With summer droughts looming, those emerald green lawns would wither into brown husks within weeks. The HOA now faced a nightmare: spend $200,000 drilling new wells and infrastructure, or come crawling to me for mercy. Karen had spent $47,000 trying to break me. Now, just fixing her water theft could cost 4 times that. Sitting in my grandfather's workshop, surrounded by the same tools that built 3 generations of Castellano men, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Karen had set out to bankrupt me. Instead, she'd handed me control over her entire neighborhood. And that's when I started assembling my team. Rebecca Santos, my legal anchor, who spoke fluent property law and bulldozed HOA bullies for sport. Jake Morrison, my surveyor, who mapped encroachments with GPS precision: 12 homes, a clubhouse, 2 roads, and a playground. Elena Rodriguez, my accountant, who tallied the HOA's potential exposure at $650,000 and climbing. Dave Kowalski, my contractor buddy, who documented decades of lawful construction with blueprints and photos. Sarah Lucas, an environmental consultant, who confirmed the spring's 50,000-gallon yield and tied it directly to Willowbrook's irrigation. It was like building the Avengers, if the Avengers specialized in property law and had a personal vendetta against suburban dictators. Rebecca laid out our strategy in plain terms: a quiet title action. 1 court case to settle every boundary, every water right, every encroachment. Once and for all. Karen thought she was closing in for the kill. But she didn't realize I was about to flip the board and make her choke on every single move she'd made. Every single affected neighbor was staring down the same brutal math. Attorneys, surveyors, legal filings, each household was looking at anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000 just to defend property they thought they already owned. That's the cruel beauty of property disputes: they're devastatingly expensive for everyone except the person who's actually right. Elena's financial analysis revealed what we came to call the nuclear option. If I wanted to push it, I could demand 8 years of back rent for unauthorized land use, plus damages for stolen water rights, plus legal fees. The numbers were staggering. We were talking about potential $1-million settlements against families who had just wanted suburban peace and quiet. But the most elegant weapon wasn't money, it was Sarah's documentation of water rights. Every single gallon flowing through Karen's irrigation system, every drop filling that retention pond, every sprinkler keeping their lawns emerald green during drought season, it all came from my spring, without permission. I could shut off the water tomorrow, and 31 households would be left explaining dead, brown lawns to their mortgage companies. The documentation process was surgical. Jake surveyed every encroachment with GPS accuracy. Sarah measured water flow rates and recorded 8 years of unauthorized usage. Dave cataloged structures that would need removal or demolition. Rebecca filed quiet title paperwork that officially put every neighbor on legal notice. Our psychological strategy was just as calculated. Rebecca's advice was simple but brilliant: let Karen make the next aggressive move, while I stayed calm, professional, and relentlessly documented. Every time she screamed, threatened, or threw a tantrum, I countered with quiet reason backed by hard evidence. To anyone paying attention, the contrast was undeniable. Meanwhile, I spent evenings carefully identifying allies within the HOA. Families already angry about Karen's wasteful spending became my quiet supporters. Many were sick of seeing their fees burned up in what was clearly one woman's personal vendetta. The steady rhythm of my copy machine became the soundtrack of justice: document after document, filing after filing, a paper trail Karen couldn't outrun. Media preparation became another cornerstone. Rebecca drilled me on interview techniques: stay calm, emphasize fairness, focus on property rights and resolution. Karen's people would try to paint me as the unreasonable aggressor, but the goal was clear: let the community see who was solving problems and who was creating them. Everything was falling into place like a well-engineered construction project. We had the legal foundation, the technical expertise, the financial analysis, and the strategic patience. Karen's desperation would expose her true nature. Sometimes the best way to defeat a bully is simply to give them enough rope to hang themselves. And then, it started happening. Karen's slide into desperation was a masterclass in failure. She called an emergency HOA meeting, demanding a $500 per household special assessment for what she melodramatically called the fight for our community's future. Standing at that podium in her power suit, voice trembling with false passion, she painted me as some kind of property rights terrorist holding the neighborhood hostage. But the response? Brutal. 23 families flat out refused to pay another dime for her crusade. The Jenkins family stood up and demanded to know why fees had tripled. The Rodriguezes openly called for an audit of HOA spending. Even Dr. Lucas, one of her earliest cheerleaders, questioned whether it made sense to keep pouring money into a losing war. Within a week, 2 board members resigned. The HOA board was bleeding credibility and members faster than a sinking ship takes on water. That's when things crossed into criminal territory. My security cameras, thank God I'd installed them, captured someone slashing my truck tires at 2:17 a.m. The footage? Crystal clear. It was none other than Dale Whitmore, Karen's husband, spray painting "Move" across my workshop door. He even looked directly into the camera, as if daring me to call the cops. By 8 a.m., the police report was filed. Detective Rodriguez, who'd gone to school with my dad, shook his head as he watched the tape. "Marcus," he said, "I've seen stupid, but this is weapons-grade stupid." Dale was staring down vandalism and harassment charges. Karen's defense? She actually told reporters Dale was investigating noise violations and was protecting community standards. She shouted this nonsense on her driveway while cameras rolled. Watching her unravel live on TV was like free therapy. I responded the same way I always did, measured, professional, and prepared. I filed a restraining order, installed motion-activated floodlights that could blind a football field, and kept feeding Rebecca's growing case file. Every incident, every outburst, every crime was fuel for a lawsuit that would make Karen's legal bills look like spare change. But her biggest mistake was yet to come. Karen walked into the office of City Councilman Roger Pike, a respected guy with over a decade of service, waving a $10,000 campaign contribution. In exchange, she wanted him to pressure zoning officials into condemning my property as a public nuisance. Pike did what every honest politician should. He reported her attempted bribery to the district attorney and kicked her out of his office. By the next morning, the local newspaper was running headlines about Karen's corruption. Overnight, her crusade for property values turned into a story about her corruption and abuse of power. Meanwhile, the HOA's finances were crumbling. They had burned through $63,000 in fees, leaving just $8,000 in their account. Steve Peterson, the board's mild-mannered treasurer, finally went public with the numbers. At a community meeting, homeowners learned their fees had funded attorneys, PIs, and consultants, all to attack a neighbor who, in reality, had been there long before their subdivision even existed. The backlash was immediate. Families threatened lawsuits against the HOA. The property management company washed its hands of the chaos and refused to renew their contract. And just when Karen thought she had another weapon, her last Hail Mary turned into her worst blunder yet. 18 families showed up that night, filling the small community room with folded arms, furrowed brows, and cautious whispers. I stood before them, not as an aggressor, but as a man intent on proving his case with dignity. Without once stooping to attack Karen personally, I laid out my position with precision. I offered formal easement agreements at fair market value, extended an olive branch of cooperation, and made it clear that I had never been the problem, only the target. I showed that I was willing to work with the community, not against it. But the federal government was less forgiving. The Environmental Protection Agency had grown tired of Karen's antics. When her false complaints hit their desks one too many times, they kicked the matter upstairs. The EPA referred her bogus reports to the FBI, and suddenly, Karen's little game of harassment had turned into a federal criminal investigation. Filing knowingly false environmental reports isn't a harmless nuisance, it's a felony. Punishable by up to $250,000 in fines and possible jail time. The walls were closing in. Her husband Dale cracked first. Already facing criminal charges for vandalism, he crumbled under pressure and plea bargained faster than you could say, conjugal visit. In exchange for leniency, he handed over damning evidence of Karen's long-running campaign of harassment, proof of her obsessive phone calls, her threats, her manipulation of the HOA, and her attempts to destroy me through every legal loophole she could invent. And then came the twist no one saw coming. While combing through the HOA's incorporation paperwork for our lawsuit, Rebecca unearthed a fatal flaw in Karen's claim to authority. According to the bylaws, no one could serve as president without at least 10 years of residency in the neighborhood. Karen had only lived there 8 when she seized control. That meant her entire presidency, every vote, every fine, every lawsuit she initiated, was legally void. She had been nothing but a pretender to the throne. The empire she built was an illusion, and the illusion shattered overnight. Her supporters scattered instantly, abandoning her like rats fleeing a sinking ship. They had ridden her coattails into financial disaster and legal jeopardy, but now they wanted no part of the fallout. The curtain had been pulled back, and the self-proclaimed queen of Willowbrook Estates stood exposed as nothing more than a fraud. The showdown came at the town hall meeting, an emergency session called to finally put this conflict to rest. It was standing room only. More than 200 people packed into the Civic Center auditorium, many driving from surrounding counties just to watch what the local newspaper had already dubbed the Willowbrook Showdown. Mayor Patricia Williams herself presided over the event, a stern presence in a gray pantsuit who recognized that this was no longer just a neighborhood squabble. It had become a community crisis demanding official intervention. The air inside was electric, buzzing with low voices and the faint hum of reporters' cameras as Channel 8, The Tribune, and even a small documentary crew jostled for the best angles. The atmosphere felt more like a political trial than a community meeting. Karen went first. She took the podium in a navy blue power suit that looked more like armor than clothing, though it couldn't disguise the sharp weight loss from months of stress or the dark circles carved beneath her eyes. She gripped the microphone like it was a lifeline and launched into what sounded like a greatest hits collection of her paranoia. I stand here tonight representing law-abiding homeowners who just want to protect our family-friendly community, she began, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Marcus Castellano threatens everything we've built here. His industrial operation violates every standard of suburban living, and his refusal to comply with reasonable regulations shows complete disregard for his neighbors' rights. The crowd murmured. A few shook their heads. By the time she tried to drag my name through the mud again, accusing me of being under federal investigation without mentioning that she herself was the one being investigated, the audience had had enough. Several people shouted corrections. Others openly laughed. Every lie she told collapsed under its own weight, and she grew shriller and more desperate, her voice rising to an almost frantic pitch. When my turn came, the auditorium hushed like a church at prayer. I walked calmly to the podium carrying a thick manila folder, the weight of 70 years of family history in my hands. Behind me, on the large screen, my grandfather's 1952 deed appeared in perfect clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and measured. "What you're looking at is the deed to land my grandfather purchased when this entire area was nothing but cornfields. This document predates every house in Willowbrook Estates by 51 years. The silence was profound. I laid out surveyor maps, pointing with calm precision to the properties encroaching on my land. The HOA clubhouse. The community pool. The main entrance. 12 homes. All of it, sitting on property my family had owned since the Eisenhower administration. I explained the water rights as plainly as I could. I own the spring that feeds your irrigation systems and your retention pond. I have paid taxes on land you've been using without permission for 8 years. Karen tried to interrupt, but Mayor Williams, wielding parliamentary order like a scalpel, shut her down. My evidence was airtight. Every document, every survey, every receipt spoke for itself. Then Rebecca stepped forward with the harassment timeline. The big screen filled with damning footage, Dale caught red-handed vandalizing my property. Phone records showing Karen's obsessive harassment of my clients. Police reports stacked in neat chronological order. Financial records of wasted HOA funds. It was like watching a prosecutor's closing argument, and the effect on the audience was devastating. Even Karen's remaining allies looked horrified. And then came the moment that silenced the room. "I could legally shut off your neighborhood's water supply tomorrow," I said evenly, letting the words sink in while Karen visibly paled. "I could force every encroaching homeowner to relocate their houses, at a cost of $500,000 per family. I could demand 8 years of back rent for unauthorized land use." The auditorium froze. You could hear individual gasps, the sharp inhale of stunned disbelief. "But I won't," I continued. "Because I'm not here to destroy this community. I'm offering fair market easements, formal water rights, and a path forward that respects both my family's property and your homes. We can resolve this with dignity, or watch this neighborhood collapse under endless litigation. The choice is yours." The applause that followed shook the walls. Even some of Karen's former allies clapped. That's when Karen snapped. She lunged for the microphone, shouting that I was blackmailing the community, accusing the mayor of corruption, screaming about conspiracies. Her makeup smeared with sweat as she ranted incoherently, pointing fingers at anyone within reach. "This is a setup," she shrieked, spittle flying. "The good old boys are protecting him. They want to destroy property values and hand our neighborhood to corporations." Security finally had to escort her out, still screaming, still unraveling in real time as news cameras captured every second. That image, Karen being dragged out of the Civic Center, ranting about imaginary conspiracies while her supporters looked away in shame, made the front page the very next morning. By the end of the night, the community's judgment was clear. Mayor Williams announced city-led mediation to resolve the property disputes. Police Chief Davidson confirmed pending criminal charges against both Karen and Dale. The county attorney explained the federal implications of her false EPA reports. The remaining HOA board members, the last 3 standing, issued a public apology to both me and the community. When Karen tried to slip out through a side exit, she was cornered by furious neighbors demanding refunds of the legal fees she had wasted. Homeowners who had lost insurance coverage because of her antics shouted questions she couldn't answer. Cameras caught every awkward, stammered response as she desperately tried to blame everyone but herself. The reckoning had come, and it was brutal. By the following week, the fallout was impossible to ignore. Karen and Dale were indicted on multiple counts: fraud, harassment, vandalism, and filing false federal reports. Their empire had not only collapsed, it had turned to rubble. The same neighbors who once praised her iron-fisted leadership now avoided her entirely, crossing the street rather than risk eye contact. Willowbrook Estates, once united under her rule of fear, was finally free of it. The HOA, stripped of legitimacy, dissolved completely. Every bylaw, every regulation, every fine issued during Karen's presidency was nullified. Homeowners who had paid thousands in penalties were suddenly entitled to refunds. What was once her greatest source of power now became a mountain of legal liabilities. The neighborhood, oddly enough, didn't crumble. Without Karen's paranoia poisoning the well, people began to talk again. Fences once seen as battle lines turned back into friendly property boundaries. Block parties, long abandoned under her leadership, returned with laughter and barbecue smoke drifting through the streets. For the first time in years, the community could breathe. As for me, I took no joy in Karen's destruction. Justice had spoken, and that was enough. Instead, I focused on building bridges, literally and figuratively. I signed easement agreements with the affected homeowners, ensuring they had legal rights to the land their homes stood on. I formalized water-sharing contracts that protected both my spring and the neighborhood's needs. What could have been an endless cycle of lawsuits transformed into long-term stability. In a strange twist, I became something of a folk hero. Local newspapers ran headlines like "Landowner Vindicated in HOA War" and "From Villain to Victorious." The documentary crew aired their episode months later, framing the entire saga as a cautionary tale about corruption, power, and resilience. People recognized me at the grocery store, shaking my hand and thanking me for standing up not just for myself, but for property owners everywhere who had been bullied by overreaching HOAs. Karen and Dale, meanwhile, faded into disgrace. They sold their house under foreclosure and left Willowbrook Estates in the dead of night, too ashamed to face their neighbors. Rumors circulated about bankruptcy, about strained family ties, about a marriage buckling under the weight of humiliation. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: their reign was over, and their names became synonymous with hubris and downfall. The real victory, though, wasn't legal or financial. It was personal. For years, I had been painted as the villain, the outsider, the troublemaker, the man who threatened the sanctity of a suburban dream. Karen tried to destroy my reputation, my business, and even my faith in the system. And yet, when the dust settled, I stood taller, stronger, and more respected than ever. It reminded me of something my grandfather once told me, back when I was just a boy walking those same fields that had sparked all this conflict: land is more than dirt, Marcus. It's legacy. It's memory. It's the proof of where we came from. But don't ever let it harden your heart. Protect it, yes, but remember that people matter more than property. For years, I thought Karen had forced me to forget that lesson. But in the end, I realized I had lived it. I defended what was mine without losing who I was. I fought fire with truth, not with vengeance. And in doing so, I turned a feud into a testimony. To this day, when I walk the property line, I no longer feel the weight of conflict. Instead, I see harmony restored, kids riding bikes past the creek, sprinklers fed by my spring keeping lawns green, families grilling together on warm summer nights. Where once there was hostility, there is now peace. And Karen? She's just a footnote. A cautionary tale. Proof that arrogance and deception can only last so long before the truth rises to the surface. The land remains. The legacy remains. And so do I.